everyone. Welcome back to the Ask Dr. Be Good show, the show where we bring you the practice of pedagogy and the politics around public education. And wow, there's a lot to talk about today when it comes to the politics around public education. We thought we were going to have a nice school start, right? COVID was behind us for the most part. The vaccine was here. It was going to cure everything. Life was going to be wonderful for this start of the new school year. Well, not so much. The Delta variant has caused us to have to possibly rethink all of the protocols that we had eased up on a little bit, and schools are willing to do that. But in some states, like in Florida and Texas, we have governors who have said, nope, we don't want and will not allow governmental entities, including public schools, to have a mask mandate. Now, this is despite the science that's out there, the science that says if even vaccinated, first of all, even vaccinated folks can get the Delta variant COVID, but that more kids, the Delta variant is more contagious and it's impacting more kids than the original variant. So if we know that we have kids coming from their home environments with people who have been around other people, and then coming to a classroom where you may have 20, 25 kids, and that's in the elementary, and the upper grades, it might be even more. Why would a simple protection like a mask be so political? And I've seen parents who have gone to the school boards and have been on both sides, right? They want the mask mandate. They don't want the mask mandate. I saw one lady who said, I don't want to be told what to do. I think I have a right not to have to do that. Well, I think the science behind this is the same type of science behind the seatbelts, behind helmets. It used to be just motorcycle helmets. Now it's even gone to the bicycle helmet. Nobody's surprised to see kids and adults wearing bicycle helmets, because the science just says that if you fall and you hit your head, you will have less of a problem if you wore a helmet. You will have less of a problem if you wore a seatbelt. So we'll have less problems if we allow kids and teachers in school to have a mask on to protect others. I haven't seen a change in the science, and that's nice, because for a while there we were having lots of changes in science. But the science behind the mask is that I protect others. And it only works if everybody in the room is also wearing a mask, so that if they come in with germs or the COVID, that they will protect me. So really, we need to have a community feel around this. We need to get past the, I don't want to wear it, therefore I am right, and I don't have to wear it. You know, I'm not saying we should give tickets out for not wearing a mask like we do with seat belts, but it has, you know, again, let me remind you that when we wear a seat belt, we're safe and we don't get a ticket. When we don't wear a seat belt, we're not safe and we could get a ticket. So if we were to think of the mask mandate as the same as the helmet or the seatbelt mandates, then maybe that would make more sense. Because what's making bad sense right now is that we have a political back and forth in states like, again, Florida, Texas, where the local county health departments are at odds with the governor's mask mandate ban. And we have county judges who are encouraging districts to still have a mask mandate. Districts don't know what to do because they want to be legal. They want to follow the government, but they're also, I will tell you, it's those schools that have been open, and we have several that have been open for 2 to 3 weeks now, already are having severe COVID numbers. Matter of fact, we have already 3 districts that have been given permission to close and go virtual for a week or two, depending on the situation, because they have more than 10% out with COVID. I mean, it's already happening. We've only been in school 2 or 3 weeks. Some districts haven't even started, and they're opening up into this craziness. But again, let me bring you some headlines. In Eanes ISD, it was reported that a parent ripped a mask off a teacher's face, and other parents were seen yelling at teachers who were wearing masks. Folks, our kids don't need to see our parents and their parents yelling at teachers, putting their hands on teachers, thinking they can rip that mask off. No, we just no. In now, one district has tried to do something interesting. In Paris ISD, they're making the mask part of their school uniform, and so. I asked a school lawyer what they thought of that, because the district seems to think that the Board of Education has the power to not have to follow the governor's mandate if the board passes this rule that kids have to wear the mask because of safety issues. So we know that's going to be challenged, don't we? It will. And then let's see, Fort Worth ISD. At first, it wasn't going to have a mask mandate. Then 100 doctors signed a letter, a petition to the superintendent in Fort Worth, asking him to have a mask mandate because they were seeing such an increase in numbers and seeing many more kids in the ICU, and many times with RSV too, both RSV and COVID at the same time. So they're asking Fort Worth ISD to mandate masks. So Fort Worth ISD has not only done that, but they've also joined a lawsuit against the governor to say that we have to. We're going to go with safety for kids first. And so we'll see what happens there. And just on Wednesday of this past week, the news came out that the first federal lawsuit filed against the Texas governor says mask mandate ban violates ADA Section 504. So let's see what that says in the article. Today, Disability Rights Texas, the federally mandated protection and advocacy agency for Texans with disability, and pro bono partners Winston and Strawn LLP, filed the federal lawsuit on behalf of 14 child plaintiffs against Texas Governor Greg Abbott and the Texas Education Agency Commissioner Mike Morath. The complaint states that the governor's executive order GA38 prohibiting school districts and charter schools from implementing mask mandates is putting students with disabilities at significant risk. It is discriminatory and violates the federal Americans with Disability Acts and Section 504 of the Federal Rehabilitation Act. The COVID-19 pandemic has dramatically impacted children with disabilities, beginning with the closure of the public school system in the spring of 2020. These students lost critical instruction and services continuing into the 2021 school year. Now the Delta variant and a surge in cases is threatening the school year, and students with disability need in-person schooling more than other student groups because they have lost so much more during the pandemic. Many of these students have underlying health conditions and are at high risk for illness and even death due to COVID. And so what they're saying is, we want to send these kids to school. They must go to school. They need school more than any other kid because they have the disability and need that one-on-one or however their IEP states they get their services. And we all know that in-school schooling is better. And yet, because of the not being able to be in a safe environment, many parents with disabled kids are hesitant about sending them back to school. So this is the first lawsuit to challenge the governor's executive order, the first federal lawsuit. The complaint explains how the order is a barrier to public schools for students with disability and that no family should be forced to choose between health and their child's education. It also states that that Texas needs to follow the recommendations of public health officials to include the mandated use of masks in areas with significant exposure. And so again, there's that science. We're ignoring the science. Under Governor Abbott's order, parents of these children face an untenable choice: educate their children at school and expose them to potential severe illness, long COVID, and even death, or keep the children home where they will receive a fraction of their education in one of the least integrated settings available with limited to no exposure to non-disabled peers. Either outcome is a violation of student rights under ADA and Section 504, and both are wholly avoidable. The lawsuit asks for a temporary restraining order that requires Governor Abbott, TEA, and districts named to cease violation of the American with Disabilities Act and Section 504, and allow local school districts and local public health authorities to require masks for students and staff as they determine is necessary. So there's that. And, it was just last month that a survey had come out in July asking parents if they were ready for in-school instruction. And they were. Parents were so ready. 94% of white parents, 84% of African-American parents, and 83% of Hispanic parents were ready to see their kids in school. And that, even though there was a discrepancy between white parents and parents of color, it was less of a gap. So more parents of color were ready to send their kids back to in-school learning. And so, people wanted to come back. They felt that they could come back. So the proportion of parents who plan to send their kids to school in person rose in comparison to the survey that they had done in May. And so if you cast your mind back to the ancient times of July 16th, by that point, Arkansas had severe outbreak. Cases were rising again nationally in the U.S., and the Delta variant had become a household term. So in May, people were ready because things were, people were getting vaccinated, more kids were getting vaccinated and all that. And then in July, when the next survey came out, people were more ready because we hadn't really gotten the full flavor of what the Delta variant was going to do. So parents had sent a strong endorsement that in-person learning, even in spite of serious health concerns, was the necessary and right thing to do. So moreover, the survey revealed that parents whose children were under 12 years old, those not yet eligible for vaccines, were just as likely to plan to send their children to school in person as were parents with kids over 12. Even among parents whose youngest child is immune compromised, 70% reported opting for in-school learning. So that's how anxious they were to get their kids back in school. That's how much they understood that in-school learning was best for them. So now we're back to parents not knowing what to do. So just as a reminder, because I've read somewhere that parents don't know what protocols are going to be in place, what COVID protocols. If you have not gotten information from your school yet about what COVID protocols are going to be in place for this new school year, please reach out and ask them. They may not have your up-to-date email. Now, I'm always working towards new listeners, hoping that new people are on and we have a new and ever-growing fan base to, because some of you have heard me say this, but I'm working to the gaps in the room as I always do. Please, please, please do not be held hostage by your school and the lack of communication from your school. Please reach out to them, reach out to your school principal, really, to ask them, what is the school doing as far as hygiene is concerned? Are you keeping up with the same type of protocols with the sanitizing the bathrooms more now? sanitizing the doorknobs and the light switches and all of that? Are you doing that as much as you did last year? Because last year, that seemed to work, along with, of course, the masks. And are we taking temperatures? All of that. So please never be held hostage by the lack of communication on the part of your school. Now, let me transition, because there are some interesting positives in our having gone through and going through still the pandemic. And that is that we actually have some ways that can already be seen in how COVID-19 has changed public education in America permanently. So this article by Recovery Lab is a research lab. And so they have been, of course, studying, all of these medical, psychological, and instructional research organizations have been just in heaven, I hate to say it, being able to study the impact that and the outcomes caused by the pandemic. Things that we never anticipated and now are understanding that it's going to be more common in our world, and it's probably not going away, right? And so here are 5 ways that it has changed. Number 1, no school or college is an island. And so, the schools are now being respected a little bit more, we hope, because it allows working mothers to have their kids in safe places. And that's always been important. If we didn't think school was safe, then moms would keep them home or be more involved in schools, right? Well, now we also know that colleges have had to really make sure their college kids are safe too, that they have meals, that they have Wi-Fi, a device. So colleges have had to become more like K-12 institutions in the sense of having to support their students. Number 2, online learning is here to stay. In some states, that is understood completely. We have, for example, I was talking to somebody in California, and he happened to mention that he and his wife had decided to keep their kindergartner at home another year. And I knew, and he didn't tell me he was from California, but I knew he must be from another state, because in Texas, that was not an option. In Texas, you are not allowed to have virtual school, at least not paid for right now. What is happening in some states like Texas is legislators are having to scramble and pass a law that allows virtual school, and in some cases to pay for virtual school, because we have this Delta variant that has just really wreaked havoc with our little ones. So in California and other states like California, Washington, Oregon, they still had the virtual school option, whereas in Texas and Florida and other states, we did not. So, and in Texas, now Texas is sort of fortunate because we have a special session, and because we have a special session, that has allowed us to write a new bill on virtual learning and sort of mandate how virtual learning would look. I think I talked about this last week, where the bill was supposed to go until 2027, but a lot of legislators did not want that bill to last that long. They wanted to last till 2023 so that they could study it and look at the data. And I found the reason behind that to be very interesting. The reason why they did not want it to go on to 2027 is because they did not want to send the message that virtual school is here to stay. We've let that dog out of the box, and that, I don't know what the right expression is, but that box has been opened. I don't think you can stuff that stuff back in. You can put it off a little bit longer, but now when we have sick kids, when we have kids who can't be at school but can still be online and keep up with school, why would we not do that? So to me, it doesn't speak very in a bit forward-thinking way of some of our legislators who are afraid that virtual school might become too much of a permanent part of our public education. So that's still going to be changing. But virtual school is here to stay in some form or another. Some states will embrace it faster than others, but it's here to stay. Technology is a basic need. Number 3, technology is a basic need. We know that. We've accepted that. We have, and this is where the schools and the districts across the state and country can be really congratulated, is that they have really gone out of the way in the last year and a half to ensure that every child had a device. Those kids that needed hotspots, Wi-Fi, they either gave free Wi-Fi's, hotspots. They either found companies that had very low cost internet. I mean, it's been amazing how supportive really our Texas, our education agencies have been, and I shouldn't just say Texas, because this is across the country where we have been able to make sure that basic technology gets in the hands of all of our families, at least our families with kids. So that's what's been accomplished in a year and a half is something that we really, as educators, really need to pat ourselves on the back for. Texas Education Agency people need to do that as well, because they were all part of that. They broker deals with internet providers, they broker deals with device providers, and really we got devices in the hands of millions of kids in really a short period of time, and so did others across the state. College admissions will never be the same. This is sort of an interesting take on the pandemic. So thank the pandemic for piercing the invincibility of standardized college entrance exam, namely the SAT and ACT, which for decades has been a mandatory part of applying to a selective college. Despite evidence that the disadvantaged minority and low-income students really, they tended not to take the test, not do as well on the test, and so forth. But with test dates canceled because of COVID and no easy way to administer them remotely, hundreds of colleges allowed students to apply for this year without submitting scores from one of these tests. There was already momentum in this direction before the pandemic, but now it will be difficult to go back. So in a survey by ACT, most colleges said that they were unlikely to return to requiring the test in the next few years. So soon after the traditional May 1 deadline to accept an offer from a selective college, colleges will learn whether eliminating the testing mandate means that they will be enrolling more racially and economically diverse class of freshmen. And then over time, the colleges will be able to see how students admitted without the test score in comparison to those submitted with tests. And that's, of course, that's great data. They will still have to give supporting help to all students, whether they came in with an ACT or SAT, if the kids are struggling, right? So the support response would be the same, and hopefully we'll get more kids of color and kids from poor socioeconomic environments getting into school. All right, and So some experts in the field also say that de-emphasizing standardized testing is only a first step towards a more equitable college admission system, while in theory, relying more on letters of recommendation and personal essays in place of test scores seems like a good thing. One would force admissions officers to consider students as individuals. It's not clear how much this will even the playing field. So again, time, right? They need to do it, and they need to check and keep track of those students that are coming in compared to those that came in with the test, and see what happens. See if it's worth it to not have those college entrance exams, because now more kids of color are able to apply and get in. Let's see. Education, this is lesson number 5. Education needs massive reinvestment. Well, you've heard me talk about that, folks, haven't you? You have heard me talk about the fact that we need to make sure we constantly, matter of fact, this show, the premise of the show is based on this number 5. It's tempting to think of the annual or biannual ritual of wrangling over a state budget as political theater, to think that advocates will always claim the sky is falling, that money comes and goes, and it doesn't make much difference. The pandemic has proved otherwise. The 2008 financial crisis began in a long slide in funding for public education that didn't really recover in some states. As of 2016, there were still 26 states that still were spending less on education per student than before the Great Recession. And schools had 77,000 less teachers, even though we had 1.5 million more students. So public and even colleges, public higher education was receiving $3.4 billion less in 2019 than in 2008, while shifting costs heavily towards tuition. That's why colleges are have been so much more expensive. The result is that COVID hit an education system significantly weakened compared to a decade earlier. So one result, as the Government Accountability Office found last year, was that nearly 4 in 10 American school districts, at least half of the school buildings, needed updated or updating, new heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. And certainly we know about the ventilation now. Many, many school districts are having to spend, and luckily they have the federal dollars to spend on adding ventilation systems to clean the air better. And of course, that is helping not only with COVID, but colds, common colds, and flu. There were so thousands and thousands fewer flu cases last year, phenomenally few. So that's going to help more than just COVID. Most educators agree that tapping the full potential of Americans to live healthy lives and contribute to a better economy will take a full throttle reinvestment in education. Biden's budget blueprint proposes boosting education funding for the next year by nearly $30 billion. Just as with little effort to close the digital divide, creative ideas are emerging to help students overcome financial hurdles and boost opportunities over the long term. So really what they're saying is what I've been saying now for, in August, it'll be 3 years that I started podcasting. I started podcasting on my own, a year and a half ago. And the whole premise is that if we don't continue funding public education in a way that leads us to kids who graduate with more than the ability to work at McDonald's, we are hurting our economy, our future economy, and that should be a worry to us. As always, time goes by quickly when we're talking about politics and public education, so thank you for being on. We hope that you'll stay tuned, come back next week, and if you liked what you heard, go ahead and forward the show to people. Remember, not only people with kids and grandparents with grandkids, they're not the only ones who need to hear this. Everybody needs to care about public education, whether they have kids or not. So go ahead and forward the show, and let's make sure we build our advocacy army for public education. And if you And if you don't like what you see about the mask mandate, by the way, let me remind you, all you have to do is go to your internet, find your local and your state legislators and pop them an email that they've made very easy to do, telling them how you feel about the mask mandates. All right, everyone. Thank you, and we'll see you again next week. Have a great week.